Hey everybody, here back for another episode of the Give, Grow, and Be Grateful podcast. Um, Today we're going to be diving into two main concepts. One is called slow down to speed up, which I know sounds like an oxymoron. And the other is learning how to steer your emotions. And that is purposely spelled wrong. If you're looking at it's an acronym STEAR, which will dive into that so that you better understand kind of what's guiding your emotions and how to navigate that more effectively so that you can steer those emotions in a direction that's beneficial for you. So I am a little under the weather today, but I just wanted to kind of go through this. I am still feeling very excited about talking about this topic, and so kind of let's just jump right in. So the concept of slow down to speed up, and I talked about this a little bit previously, but I wanted to dive into it more because it was something I repeated to myself over and over and over for a long time, and I added more meaning and more context to it over time, and now to the point where this is truly one of the most critical aspects um, for behavior change, for trying to get more in alignment with your values, your vision for your life, things that are purposeful for you, just experiencing life in a way that is more joyful, more beneficial. It is one of the most important aspects. So I really want to dive into it. And when I first started it, like many of the things I've learned, this actually came from some of the business side of things, where my COO, Jason Wright, we were chatting back and forth, and some of our processes, we were talking about how, we often look at speed as, you know, definitely something that gives us a competitive advantage. And so we want to do things quickly, but there's also a point at which you can be doing things quickly, but not efficiently or effectively, and maybe not aligned with what you're trying to do. Right. And so in those cases, it's important to slow down, right? To make sure that everything is aligned, and start asking yourself questions, start thinking about what's the process you're following, right? What are the things that we're doing from a business perspective? And is that aligning with what we actually want to achieve? Because it doesn't matter how fast you go if you're on the wrong path, right? And that was and honestly, this is a huge part of why I'm getting this book out there. I know a lot of the things that I'm sharing are already out there. I'm just trying to say it in a different way. And my hope is that it will resonate with certain people, right? Like some people, just the message gets through to them better in a certain way, or one element might get through to them in another way. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is just take all the things that over time for me have been really impactful and just share those with you in hopes that some of them will land, right? And that you'll take those and apply them in your own way. So so for me, this when I learned at a very young age. I mean, I read. I, I for some of you who kind of listen to some of my past story, you know that I was around 23, 24. I was still kind of living at home, wasn't really doing a whole lot. Um, I I was starting to really read a lot. I was starting to read a lot of self improvement books, and try to understand and how to kind of get myself motivated. Really, was a lot of it was like how to become more motivated, how to achieve the things I want to do. All that kind of things. Like so, I started to learn a lot of these things, and what I did was extremely effective. Like, if you know my story, I basically, not much after that, I ended up having a child. I ended up writing down what I was going to achieve in my life by a certain age and by a certain time and all that kind of stuff. And I did all those things. And yet I got to that point and I was still very stressed. I didn't, um, you know, after achieving all of my dreams, you would think, oh gosh, you're just on cloud nine, right? And I wasn't really there. And so this is a key component why I want to make sure that I don't only share how to achieve all the things, right? Because at the end of the day, that's, I wouldn't say it's, I don't want to diminish it by saying not as hard, but it is hard, but if you look at the numbers, it's probably not as hard as achieving things while also continuing to be aligned with what's truly important to you. And so a lot of that is because we don't take the time to slow down, to check in with ourselves, to make sure that we understand what we truly want, honestly, and why what we're currently wanting is there. Some of that that's been programmed into us, some of that is maybe okay because you're like, hey, that does align with what I want to do, what I want to achieve, all those kind of things, right? But some of it may not. Some of it may be that, your parents wanted you to play that sport, or your parents wanted you to be a doctor, and that was something, or your family, it was tradition to do X, Y, and Z. And so, there's a lot of those kind of things where it's like, yeah, that does align with what I want, and that's fine. Or maybe it doesn't. And that's part of what is so important, not only about what it is that you do, but how do you want to be on a day-to-day basis? Just your experience of being is, once, what's crazy is once you go through everything and you go through all the processes, and I'm giving you the shorthand version, which will seem very simple, but it's because I've gone through, and it's been kind of through this complex understanding of all the different areas where it's like, okay, yeah, all these things people think are important are a lot of times on the have side of things, right? It's like if you think of the be do have concept, um, and basically a lot of people switch that as like, well, once I have this thing, right, whatever it is, then I'll use the a business analogy in this case because sometimes I use that is, once I have the title of manager, then I'll do all the things that a great manager would do, and then I'll be a great manager. And that's just not the way life works. Unfortunately, a lot of the way we apply that to the world and to other aspects, our relationships and other areas, we apply it in the same concept. It really should be switched. It should be. I need to first be a great manager, right? I need to believe. I need to have the right concepts in my mind. I need to believe it's possible. I need to start acting as if, right? So I don't like the term fake it till you make it because it implies insincerity. Um, but I do like project it until you reflect it, right? So you want to start being that and projecting that, and then start doing those things that a great manager would do, the way you treat other people, the way you act, the responsibility you take, all those things you do. And then you will have the title of manager. And what's interesting is then that having isn't actually as important to you. It's really, most people who achieve something, it's not about the thing they achieved, it's about the person they became in order to achieve that thing. That's what is truly valuable. So that's why I'm saying, like, work it backwards from there. So slow down to speed up sounds like an oxymoron. It's one of the most effective things you will do. When we talk about the riverbed and we talk about how our thoughts, emotions, and actions are like the water of a river, it's really hard to change the direction of a river while the waters are just gushing through there, right? So if you think about it from that riverbed concept, and when you're in a high emotional state and just it's raining and the waters are high and everything's flooding through that river, like imagine trying to redirect that, right? Imagine trying to redirect that. It's possible, 100%, but it's a lot harder, right? And so what happens when you slow down is your thoughts, your emotions, your actions slow down. You take that water from just rushing super fast to a little bit of a trickle. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. Meditation is a is a thing, but just breathing is a great thing. Focused visualization is a great thing. There's a lot of terms being thrown out there, mindfulness, all these things, and it's really about finding what works for you. I do think it should involve some sort of mind training where you're learning to train your attention to stop focusing on all the things out there and to bring that internal to yourself and start kind of, or it can be external at first. It's kind of like whatever works for you. And then you just keep training that. because your mind is currently trained to be distracted by whatever things are out there it deems important, all that kind of stuff. So you're literally training your attention to learn how to focus your attention, because ultimately, again, trying to take these big concepts and put them into very simple packages, ultimately the quality of your life the quality of your life, the impact you have, the way you experience your life is based on the quantity and quality of the attention and the way that that's aligned with your vision for your life, your values, and what you find purposeful, right? And that's not saying that that's an absolute, but that's a concept to understand that's important. And so what this does is, as you learn to slow down, you start training your attention, you start training your mind to your attention. You get better at being able to tune out things that aren't important and focus on things that are important. And what's amazing about that is once you start to do that, once you start to choose what gets your attention, whew, it lowers your stress. There's all these different kind of things that come with it. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit deeper. I think it's important that you schedule slow time. I think it's extremely important. When I think of give, grow, and be grateful and what that means to me, and that's my life motto, and that's kind of what I would tell everybody. If I could share three things, is I would say it's not in life. It's not about what you get. It's about what you give. Right at the end of your life, it's really learning what you're passionate about giving, and as you give that to others, it fills them up. But one of the most important things you can do is give to yourself first, right? It's kind of like uh, the concept of paying yourself first and investing, and how over time that compounds. Investing in yourself first compounds as well, and when you do that, it is not a selfish act. And I think that there's a balance between that, of course, but taking some time for yourself, if you're not doing that, is actually one of the best things you can do for yourself and for others, because as you improve yourself, you improve how you show up for others, and you actually become better at that. So when you give to yourself, you actually learn to grow and you can give more to others. So scheduling yourself some slow time, when we dive into the actual aligning your strategy with what you uncover about yourself and the self-awareness and all that kind of stuff, we'll talk about kind of a macro level, and we'll talk about a micro level. A macro level is really understanding the long-term vision and what your values are, and what you find purposeful, and really kind of establishing different goals and things that you see for your future, so that at the micro level each day you can schedule some slow time. And that slow time allows you to then each day, because I had a really hard time with this, but I was very good at doing sprints, and then I would slow down rather than just those ordinary things done every day consistently that produce extraordinary results. So what I learned to do over time was to what break it down into those small pieces each day. What do I need to be doing each day, a little bit of each day, in order to live and be the way I want to be? Right. So how's that align with my health goals? How's that align with my personal goals? How's it align with my relationship goals, my financial goals? So I break that into the different groups, and then that slow time, what I like to do, and I'm not telling you that this is what you should do, though I think elements of this you should probably incorporate, is in the slow time that I schedule. I schedule time where I am I would say you should be doing something where you're focusing on gratitude, because that's like a cheat code. It's a superpower. I talked a little bit about that in the biology and what that actually does, how it helps rewire the brain, how it helps you actually feel fulfilled while also motivating you to be more aligned with the things that you're actually showing gratitude for. So gratitude is definitely a cheat code. So I think you want to have some time where you're focusing on being grateful, and not just I don't think it is as valuable as just write down a list, but if that works for you, then just write down a list. What I actually do is like to close my eyes. I like to cut off all the other stimulus and think about different people, think about different experiences, think about elements of myself that where I'm maybe even struggling, and then I'm grateful for that. Like I want to get nuanced and think about the very small things. Like when is the last time you were grateful for the ability to breathe. Or if you have vision, to see, and if you have a hearing, like to be able to hear, like we often take for granted the things that are kind of constantly with us. But it's important to kind of come back to that and just focus on being grateful for some of the simplest things that if those were taken away, I'm sure you would want that back, right? If you lost your ability to see, right? How would that impact your life, right? But we often don't think about those things. We get to this level of comfort and happiness with this normality that we are at, and then we want more from there as opposed to being grateful for some of the things we have. Not that it's not okay to want more. Like it's definitely what this is all about is actually wanting to grow and become better and achieve more, be better and help others more, um, while at the same time being fulfilled from that, what you're doing. So for me, gratitude is a huge component. I would also think about and I would do the way I do gratitude would be actually experiencing some of those things. So I'll look at current and past experiences and I'll actually relive those experiences and I'll be grateful for that person and how they shared with me their feelings, even if it was painful for me, right? I might be actually grateful for that because I want them to share that with me. And and I'm wanting to get better at being able to hear other people's feelings. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's that I'm grateful for my team, which a lot of times I'm thinking about all the different team members and the work that we do every day for our clients and all that. And maybe our clients and maybe my wife and like spend time thinking about that, maybe our kids and I kind of switch it up every day where I'm like focusing on some of those things and just really spending time and thinking about how grateful I am for those things that we can often take for granted, right? And I'll actually visualize it. I'll live there. I'll be there. I'll feel it. So I close up my eyes and I really just relive that experience and I really think about how grateful I am for that. And it really does. It fills me up with joy and fulfillment as I'm doing that. And as I mentioned before, it helps rewire your brain so you actually pay more attention to that in the future. When you're in the unconscious, when you're in the subconscious, repetition and realigning your brain, kind of that neuroplasticity to look out for those things. When you're present in the moment, you'll naturally see those things more often because your supercomputer is now saying, "Hey, this is something." And at the biological, neurochemical level, it's something that literally is firing dopamine, and so your brain is saying, "Hey, we want to optimize for more dopamine." Is the neurochemical version if you break it down to that level. But so gratitude is a critical component of it. I also think aligning with future. So one is kind of spending some time in the past, and the other is maybe looking at the future. Like, what things do I want to see in the future? What are some of the goals I'm wanting to achieve? What are some of the ways of being that I want to be better at? And then imagining them as if they are done, like seeing that happen, imagining yourself being that way. Maybe it's for me, some of my past experiences when I would react in a less healthy way to being cut off from, and like I would go into more of what would be considered like road rage, would I would imagine that happening and I would play in my mind, right? So I'm literally practicing this experience in my mind as I'm going through and I imagine that happening. And then I imagine the response that I want to have more of a healthy response. And I actually go through that process in my mind of seeing me respond, me actually thinking kind of more from an empathetic standpoint of going like, hey, I don't know what's going on in their life. It's not about me. They're not trying to hurt me. They probably don't even, excuse me, they may have not even seen me. Like, so I practice that part, and then I practice the part of asking myself, like, what question, like, if I have a question that I want to direct myself in a way, is how can I keep myself and my family safe? For those of you who don't know, this might seem a little off because I've already talked about this in another episode, but um, I basically practice through that. And what happens is this is repetition. Your mind doesn't necessarily know the difference between you doing something in your mind and you doing something in reality. I guess when you say it's for your mind, it's real either way. So your mind just goes, okay, we just did that thing. Okay, we just did that thing. And the more you visualize and go through that process and imagine it being done and how good you feel afterwards and the experience of that. Maybe it's a goal that you're trying to get healthier. And so you're imagining yourself, just, hey, I just want to get up and head to the gym, right? Like you're not even thinking about the whole of working out and making it really complex. You're just going like, I just want to get up in the morning and go to the gym, and I want to, get there. And then you imagine doing that, getting to the gym, and how great you feel just getting up and achieving that thing. And we'll talk more as we, like breaking down goals into smaller things and why that's so important and how it actually helps create those new pathways. Because it literally reinforces all the positive achievement of those things, reinforces that path. So when you make it this really big, complicated thing, it makes it harder to achieve those things. So make it really easy to achieve the things that you want to do, and then just keep kind of building upon those, right? So it's that slow upward spiral. So those are two critical things I would schedule: is time to spend some time on gratitude and time to spend some time on future focused goals. Imagining your vision that you have for your life. Maybe it's for your relationship, maybe it's for your business, maybe it's for your career, maybe it's for your health, and you're just kind of imagining that coming to fruition and experiencing that. And what that does, it now gives your brain, your body confidence, because you've already done it. And your mind's already done said thing. So it's a lot easier for you to do that in the future. That's why visualization is so powerful. It's us experiencing doing the thing without actually doing the thing. And so then when we do the thing, which when I went skydiving for the first time, I had jumped out of that plane, gosh, hundreds of times in my mind before I actually jumped out of the plane, right? Because I had experienced it over and over and over, doing it in a positive way, not, in a negative way. And so those are some of the things that I would say I would try to make critical as something you should spend some time on. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do more like mindfulness type exercises where you're also spending some time just being present and being aware of thoughts that go through your mind, and you're not really judging them and you're not really guiding them. You're just kind of experiencing those things as they go by and saying, oh, interesting thought. You're not assigning a lot of meaning to them and attention. I think that that's an important element too. But in meditation is slightly different. So they're all a little bit different. It's really about understanding for you what exercise helps the most. And I think the way I do the gratitude and I do the visual, it's kind of a balance between all of those things, right? There might be some breathing as I'm thinking about it and I'm really focusing my attention. So there is some elements of meditation. There's some elements of mindfulness that are part of that. And so really, I'd say if you have gratitude and you have some future focused goals as part of your slow time, and, one other thing I would say if I was to add a third thing is just focusing on the simplest thing, and which would be more along the lines of like meditation, maybe, where it's like learning to train your mind to focus on just your breath. Because if you can over time, it's going to be really hard. You're going to keep straying and you're going to keep coming back. But that's that muscle of learning to draw your attention towards something. And if you can train yourself to if you can train yourself to focus your attention on just your breath, which is kind of boring, you can start to like notice your breath and think about specific aspects of your breath and start to get really good at that. What you're actually doing is you're training your attention to be able to focus on something. It'll actually make you perform better in a lot of the other areas of your life when you're trying to focus on certain things. Because if you can focus on just your breath, it's kind of like dodgeball. If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge anything. No, I'm just joking. But so where this comes into play, and there's a couple different concepts I want to talk about here, is we talked about this and I introduced this in the last episode, is the difference between like autopilot mode and manual mode. And so autopilot mode is when we're in it usually about 95% of the day. And that's when we're working from all of our past programming, things that come up, we're responding to based on meaning and associations we've created, all these beliefs and experiences and elements that come into play. We're just assigning that meaning to it. And we're just responding often, reacting more so than kind of moving towards responding, where it's a more mindful response. And I don't look at this as a light switch. And there's a great book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, which gets into more of the scientific elements of this. You want to read. It's a little dry, but I find it interesting. So I think of this as like a spectrum, across the board because a autopilot isn't bad, so it's important to understand that. I think a lot of times we automatically think this is bad. Autopilot's extremely important, extremely valuable. In fact, what we're doing when we get into the manual mode is we're reprogramming our autopilot is the goal, right? Part of what we're doing, and as we downshift, right? So moving from autopilot, slowing down is we're taking our thoughts, emotions, and actions and we're trying to slow them down. We may be trying to limit stimulus in other ways where we're just kind of trying to slow things down and downshift. We're becoming more aware of ourselves, right? And so we can downshift into manual. So if I am speaking on a stage in front of 800 people, um, I could probably be somewhere in the middle of these two, but if I'm too far over on the manual mode, it's not going to be as good of an experience for the audience. It might be great for me. I might not care, but all in all, it's going to be much slower. I will be much more introspective. I'll be thinking more about myself. I'll be thinking less about um, the people outside of me, probably in that moment, right? And so it's important to be able to be in autopilot. That's why when we usually do a presentation or do something like that, it's usually on a topic we're very aware of, right? We've already kind of ingrained this in us. If we're playing a sport, we've ingrained those habits into us. We're in autopilot. Now we can develop bad habits in autopilot, and we do that over and over. And so it takes time to retrain those, right? Whether it's a sport, whether it's in life, in a relationship, whatever, it's very similar in the concept. So um, it's important to learn to downshift from autopilot to manual. Um, and there's certain instances, which I'll kind of dive into a little bit here more, but there's certain instances where you might have certain trauma or triggers that affect you and create more dramatic emotional experiences. Um, they might be trauma responses. They might be very heightened joy responses potentially too. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that it can be. Um, you can react to different stimulus in those situations, but I think it's important to understand that in order, like when you're in autopilot, you're driving, you're moving, you're not reprogramming the computer, you're not reprogramming the pathways, and so in order to reprogram, in order to change behavior, um, you need to downshift, and become more conscious, right? Where we can start utilizing our willpower. Our willpower isn't as strong when we're in autopilot because we're working off past conditioning. So you have to downshift in order to make willpower stronger and make it more active in that state, to make our critical thinking and our problem solving more active in that state, right? So that's when we start to become more aware and we can start to do that. So, just a couple concepts I wanted to kind of touch on there a little bit. Excuse me. I do want to touch on this quote quickly. It's a quote from Viktor Frankl. He wrote in the book Man's Search for Meaning, which is a phenomenal book. And I would recommend diving into that in greater detail and reading his book. But yeah, the short version, and this won't do it justice, but him and his wife went into a Nazi internment camp. He lost his wife, and it was kind of a horrendous just experience when you go through, and he writes about all those different elements. He writes about the people that he was with, and some of the things that he observed, and so this is one of the more popular quotes that came from that. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and freedom." And the book is called Man's Search for Meaning. So that is a huge tip to what is in between that space. One of the key things he talks about is how important meaning is to our lives, right? What we find meaningful, what we find purposeful, and how important that is. And so I came up with this acronym STEAR. Obviously, it's spelled wrong, but I think it's a great way to remember and break down some of the different elements as you're thinking through. Like maybe it's a behavior that you are trying to change, right? So I'll use my example of when I used to go into more of that road rage, which was definitely something I wasn't proud of, and it was something I felt out of control at the time. And so the stimulus. So I'll walk you kind of through what this stands for. STEAR, STEAR. The S is for stimulus. So the stimulus in this case was someone cutting me off in traffic in usually somewhat of a dangerous way, right? So they pull in front of the car. We're traveling at 60 miles an hour, and they pull in front of the car 3 feet in front of it. And in my mind, the way I was experiencing it previously was that stimulus, the thought or meaning I was assigning to that, right? From past patterns, beliefs, all that kind of stuff. What I was assigning to that in that instance was that this person is trying to hurt myself and my family. So if you understand, and we've talked about the biological and the brain and all that stuff, when there's a threat from that standpoint, you go right to your what's like the um, often called the reptilian brain, and you go into it's like an amygdala response. You may have heard that, where it's like literally hijacks your amygdala, and you go into either a fight or flight response. Sometimes there's other ones where you flee or fawn, all that kind of stuff, but generally go into that response. And my reaction in that case was a fight response. So it would immediately come into that, and I would get the emotion, right? So it would send the signal through my body that I'm in danger, that my family's in danger. And my response to that was to fight in that situation. And so my responses were my actual action was very bad. I would usually drive up, cut the person off because I was trying to make sure they understood, whether they saw me or not, like that they can't do that, that they can't threaten myself and my family. And so that was what was going on in my mind, right? And the result was that I was actually putting my family in danger by my actions, right? And this is a common thread amongst most things in life. When we start to get into this thought and this kind of emotion, we usually end up becoming the thing that we are against. And it's a crazy thing, but it happens very often where you get the stimulus, you get this thought, and you, whatever that feeling is, and then your action because of that, the result is you end up often getting into the same pattern as that other person. And so, in order to, or thing, or stimulus, or whatever it is, but in order to do that in a more effective way, we need to steer this. And so, it sounds easy when you lay it out like this, right? But in real life scenarios, there's going to be times where you go through this so many different times and you're like, I don't feel in control from stimulus to result, right? I don't feel like I'm able to take the wheel. So like anything, when you're downshifting from autopilot to manual mode, there's a number of different things that you can do, but it's important to understand that each incremental stage is growth. Just realizing that you're doing it is growth. Once you start to realize that this stimulus is happening and I don't want it, that's not something I want to happen, that's growth. Like, feel very good about that recognition of that. Though you want to change it, don't beat yourself up. The often programmed responses that we will then kind of beat ourselves up over not doing this thing, and we will punish ourselves almost, right? We'll talk to ourselves negatively, we'll get upset with ourselves, other people will get upset with us reinforcing this. There's all those things, right? So it is important to recognize that first step is like, okay, I'm just recognizing this. And that for me, as I was going through that process, was like, hey, this is something I want to change. I know it's not going to happen overnight. So I think the expectation was important, realizing that behavior change doesn't usually happen overnight. I may be successful at downshifting and becoming conscious and using my willpower to manually do it, but then I may fall back in that pattern. So you may get better. And so you may start to realize at some point that, okay, yeah, this stimulus happened, and then the thought happened, the emotion happened, but I stopped myself from taking action, right? That's a huge that's a huge step forward, right? So you might actually be able to recognize that you went into this experience, you felt that way, the thought you assigned to it, the meaning you assigned to it, the emotions you had, but then the actual you didn't respond, you didn't actually take an action, or you responded in a different way, right? So there's that aspect. You can also keep moving up stages where you go, okay, now instead of when that stimulus happens, I still have that thought meaning assigned to it, and I have this emotion, right? You can actually start to change the meaning. And this is where it becomes the most powerful, because then it helps to some extent, depending on how you do it. Like, depending on what this is, what the trigger for you is, or if you actually have a traumatic event around it. I mean, I highly recommend, consulting a therapist in situations, especially where it's a more traumatic type situation. And it's possible that, my response in that was, there was an underlying traumatic event that possibly affected that, right? But in that case, it was something that I kind of just worked through myself. Not that it wouldn't have been helpful to work through with a therapist, but I highly recommend, that, like, just talking to someone who can help kind of give you an objective viewpoint, because it's very hard to be objective of ourselves. It's almost impossible, I would say. You get better at it, but it's still having that objective viewpoint. And even someone else looking at you isn't necessarily objective. They're subjective in their own beliefs and all that kind of stuff, but it gives you another viewpoint, which is extremely valuable. So, continuing to kind of grow, if you were to think of different stages of, like, getting better at this, and, like, telling yourself, like, hey, I'm getting better at recognizing when this stimulus comes up. I'm getting better at changing the meaning that I'm assigning to it, which ultimately, that's where our emotions come from, right? It's We don't just feel something without input that there's meaning assigned to. Sometimes our body, and there's things like that, but there's input telling us that, hey, you feel this way, or you feel this way, or wherever you're putting your attention, wherever your body is, the way you're holding your body. There's all those different elements that come into play. But the same data, the same input could come through to 10 different people, and they could all assign different meanings to it. And because of those different meanings to it, they assign, one person over here could be super happy and the other person could be super sad. It's because of the meaning we assign to it, right? So it's important that we start to get better at that and start asking ourselves, well, what meaning am I assigned to that? And explore, like, what's going on there. And once I started to realize that I was telling myself that this person was trying to hurt myself and my family, I came to the realization, oh, my response in that situation is going to be very different. Because if someone was truly trying to hurt myself and my family, like, yeah, I probably, in that case, I'm rightfully able to react in a, you know, maybe a more extreme way to protect myself and my family. But in this case, that wasn't the true case, right? It's very likely that they didn't even see me. It's likely that they may have an emergency going on in their life. They're not actually, like, they don't even know me and my family. They're not trying to hurt us. Maybe they're being dangerous in what they're doing, right? So I can start to use my critical thinking and problem solving when I'm not in that heightened emotional state. So I have to be able to slow down, and to get to that point where I can start to think critically and think through this. And then, using visualization, I can reimagine going through that process and changing that. So then I can start to go, okay, hey, this isn't about me. This happens. And then I can ask myself a question like, how can I keep myself and my family safe? Because our questions guide our attention, right? And using those situational questions is extremely powerful to help guide your attention in the direction that you want it to go. Then you actually are in more control of your emotions, because the way you control your emotions is by controlling meaning. And your responses are a direct proportion, in order of your thoughts and feelings, your responses. If you look back at all your responses, and when you were in a very heightened state, maybe you were in amygdala hijack, you were very emotional, you were upset, and you had feelings, a lot of times your actions or responses in those scenarios aren't the ones you're most proud of, right? And they didn't really come with good results, right? And so at the end, if we want to have good results, if we want to experience life in a better way, we have to learn to control the meaning we're assigning to things. And that, I mean, saying it is simple, but it takes work to go back through that riverbed and understand what are these core beliefs that I've created and why am I guiding them? Sometimes we don't even know what they are. So it does take work to go through and kind of process some of these different things. So some people will call shadow work, they call different things and like experiencing trauma. And I'm not necessarily saying it has to be trauma per se, and I know there's a big spectrum there of trauma. It can literally be a belief that you developed that necessarily wasn't traumatic in the definition of what would normally be for trauma, but can just not be serving you in a way that is beneficial for you, for your family, for your community, because it is there. Now there could be elements of trauma, there's all that stuff that comes into play. So each of these, I find it helpful to break these down into different categories and kind of ask myself questions about that. Because one thing I can do, I can look at stimulus just by itself and say, hey, like I'm taking in too much stimulus is one aspect, right? And so I don't have a lot of control. Like I'm getting all these different things and I feel very kind of distracted because I have so much stimulus coming in. And each one of these stimulus I'm assigning meaning to, whether I'm consciously doing it or unconsciously doing it. I'm categorizing and determining through that. My subconscious is processing, somewhere from 11 million to 40 million bits per second of data that's coming in and determining whether that's important and what to surface to my conscious brain, right? And so part of getting better at this is limiting the input, limiting the amount of data. So sometimes that's where that slow down to speed up comes into play, right? Sometimes it's literally using technology in a way that's more beneficial because a lot of times technology can be the problem, but we can also use it to be more effective rather than getting news feed that's like from in just all these different sources coming in, right, that have bias and are trying to stir your meaning, right? So the way they write headlines, and I'm saying this from experience, the way they write headlines is literally by understanding some of your deeper psychological needs, some of the fears you have, and they're playing on those in order to get your attention. That's why our attention is so powerful, right? They want to get your attention because they want to monetize your attention. And so once you start to look at that and go, okay, hey, I need to realize that these people are trying to get my attention in different ways, but I need to get good at putting my attention where it aligns with my vision, values, and purpose in life. Now, as I mentioned before, there is the caveat that around cognitive bias that I recommend not. I'm not saying not to keep an open mind. I think that that's extremely dangerous from certain aspects when it comes to those things. But I do think you can very quickly start to look at things and go, you know what? I can cut out a lot of this stimulus. All these notifications on my phone, I have most of my notifications turned off because I don't want to be distracted and I know how much that impacts my focus in certain areas. So all those notifications, right? That the technologies, their technologies want to use that so that they can keep you involved in their technology, right? The different notifications, the pop-ups, the likes, that's like social media or just technology or your mobile phone, like your addiction to that. There's similar elements that they're using here from what I'm explaining to you. They understand these as well, and they're trying to use that to grab your attention. Things that are important to you, like social, social connections, is a literally hardwired into us, evolutionary from our way of surviving. We have a deep fear of being outcast from the group, right? Because that affects our survival. So then I heard a Samsung commercial the other day that they're saying like, your friends come over to your place and you don't have this TV, and you're basically like a letdown to your friends. And like, it was basically saying like, you're going to lose your friends, or you're not going to have friends if you don't have this TV. Most advertisers use some of that, what I would think of as the dark side. They use some of those elements to some extent because they're what grabs your attention. It's what works. So unless we actually become more aware of that and control that more, they're just going to keep using it, and you will to some extent continue feeling like a pinball in a pinball machine that's being bounced around, because you are in that autopilot mode, and your programming is, they know you're programming, and so they're going to keep playing with it. So there's that element of just cutting down stimulus, and limiting it to things that are more aligned with what kind of life you want to live, and how you want to be, how you want to have an impact, how you want to be with others. If you want to be compassionate, if you want to be patient, if you want to be more successful, more confident, whatever it is, that will help you align with those things in a more effective way. And then you want to start thinking about thoughts and meaning. And so it's that metacognition of thinking how you think, understanding how you're assigning meaning to certain things, and learning to get better at changing the meaning. And start with small elements. It can be as simple as realizing that when you see a symbol, you assign meaning to that. And you have this whole framework that you have created of all these different associations with that symbol, right? Whatever, there's tons of different symbols. But this is one thing, like if you look at political parties, this is something they use very heavily to manipulate and influence. And I'm talking about both sides, to manipulate and influence people to take action. And what gets people to take action? There's fear, right? Fear, anger, shame, guilt. There's all these different things that people are using to kind of get your emotions, to get you to take actions, right? Because they want to influence that, as opposed to you realizing that, okay, hey, and it may be that you spilled coffee in the morning, and you assigned the meaning to that this means I'm going to have a bad day. And because you assign that meaning to it, your brain starts to look for other things throughout that day where it's like, yep, I'm having a bad day. And, I knew it because I spilled coffee. There's all kinds of weird things that we do, that can be based on just simple little meaning associations. And so understanding that framework of how we associate meanings, and how that meaning then makes emotion, right? I can assign something. I realized at one point when my wife and I would get into to more of that kind of heated level of an argument, as opposed to just discussing something. We're starting to get that heated level argument when I would assign a meaning of that she is being disrespectful to me, right? My emotion there. But when I would change that meaning, and I would realize that she's hurting, and the emotion that I would actually assign from that spot would be very different. You can also see if I assign one feeling or one meaning, the other meaning, it leads to certain feelings, and then it leads to certain actions based on that, right? And the result. So I can also work backwards from what is the result or outcome I want, and what action would be better to do in that element, and what kind of thoughts or feelings might actually support that series, right? And help that outcome. So you can work backwards from that standpoint as well. So ultimately, what this is about, the STEAR, is learning to, the whole goal, and this is the packaged version, is how to steer your attention to align with your intention. And I want you to know how powerful that is, because if you can get very clear about your intentions, right? So having clarity around your intentions is so critical. Then really it's just about learning to steer your attention to align with your intention on a consistent basis. Once you do that, you will start to feel more at peace, more joy, more fulfillment, more success, more accomplishment, everything, because it is aligned with your intentions. Okay. So, with that, I could go into a lot more, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. Please do subscribe. And if you have any questions, like I mentioned, uh, just reach out, ask any questions. I really appreciate you guys' time. And I think the next chapter is going to be more on state, or not next chapter, but next section is going to be more on understanding how our state, our energy, our emotion, our intentions, and some of the different things that we're experiencing, how that impacts as part of belief and biology, and how that's kind of a critical part of the group that is often guiding our emotions. So that's what I'll be talking about next. All right. Thanks.